Briar Fox wasn't the kind of person anyone could easily describe. She was wild, unpredictable, and far too independent for most people's liking. In the small, rugged settlement where she had grown up, her name had become almost as infamous as the storms that swept across the planet. She had no interest in the quiet, orderly life others expected of her. She was driven by a need for freedom, an itch for adventure that wouldn't let her settle down. But there came a time when even Briar's wild spirit couldn't keep her safe. After a particularly reckless decision, a dangerous stunt involving a stolen vehicle and a near disaster for a nearby town, her parents, exhausted by her constant troublemaking, made a decision that would change everything. They sent her to a ranch miles away from their home to learn some discipline. It wasn't a choice Briar had made willingly, but it was one they were determined to enforce. So at the age of 20, she found herself standing at the gates of Callahan's ranch, a place famous for its hard work, untamed landscapes, and reputation for breaking even the most stubborn souls. As Briar looked at the large iron gates of Callahan's ranch, she didn't know what to expect. She had heard rumors about the ranch and its owner, Thomas Callahan. The ranch was known for being a haven for those looking for a second chance, but it also had a reputation for being a tough place. People said Tom didn't tolerate laziness, and if you didn't pull your weight, you'd be sent packing. Briar wasn't exactly eager to prove herself, but after the trouble back home, she had no other choice. When Briar stepped onto the dusty ranch grounds, she immediately noticed how different it was from the small settlement she came from. The air smelled of dry grass and fresh earth. The vast sky stretched endlessly above, and the fields seemed to go on forever. She could feel the weight of the land's quiet power. She had spent her whole life fighting for freedom, but here the land seemed to demand something else: respect. The workers on the ranch eyed her suspiciously when she arrived. They'd heard of Briar Fox and weren't sure what to make of her. Some had warned Tom that bringing in a rebellious young woman would be more trouble than it was worth. They thought she'd be another headache. But Tom wasn't like most people. He didn't believe in judging others based on rumors. Instead, he watched her closely, studying her with the patience of someone who had seen more than his fair share of wild storms, both literal and figurative. "She's got fire," Tom said to himself when he first laid eyes on Briar. "Let's see if it can be channeled." At first, Briar wasn't sure what to make of the man. He was older than she expected, with weathered skin and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't even imagine. He wasn't quick to speak, but there was something about his silence that felt different from the quiet of others. It was steady, grounded, as if he could hold his ground against any force. "Welcome to the ranch," Tom said when they finally spoke. "You've got two choices. Work hard, prove you belong, or leave. This is a place for those who can handle the land. And the land can be unforgiving. The question is, can you keep up?" Briar didn't respond right away. She wasn't used to being told what to do, and the idea of working hard didn't exactly excite her, but she didn't have much of a choice. She figured she'd try to survive long enough to make her way out, just like she had with every other place she'd been. The first few days were grueling. Briar was assigned to the stables where she had to feed, groom, and tend to the horses. She had no experience with horses and, to be honest, didn't care much for them. But the ranch didn't care about what she liked or didn't like. It only cared about results. The other workers barely spoke to her. They seemed to have little patience for someone like Briar, who couldn't be bothered to follow the rules. They gave her the cold shoulder, as if daring her to make a mistake. Briar's temper flared up a few times, especially when she found herself mucking out the stalls or repairing fences, but she bit her tongue. She had made a promise to her parents to try, so she was going to try, at least for now. One morning, as Briar was tending to the stables, Tom approached her. He stood by the fence watching her work without saying a word. Briar, irritated by the silence, glanced up at him. "What do you want?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "I've been thinking," Tom said, his voice as calm as ever. "You've got a lot of fire in you, but you've also got to learn how to control it." Briar didn't answer. She wasn't sure what he meant by that. To her, fire was something that couldn't be controlled. It was a force of nature, something that burned everything in its path. Tom continued, "I've got a horse that might teach you something about control. It's not like the others here, and it'll take a lot to handle. But I think you might be just the person to try." Briar didn't understand at first. A horse? How could a horse teach her anything? But Tom didn't wait for her to answer. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers. The next day, Tom led Briar to the far end of the ranch, where a horse stood alone in a large open pen. It was a magnificent animal, a wild stallion with a black coat that gleamed in the sun. The horse's eyes were sharp and unyielding, and its powerful build was both graceful and intimidating. It wasn't like any horse Briar had ever seen before. There was something fierce about it, as if it had a spirit as untamed as her own. "This is Shadow," Tom said. "He's not like the others. He's wild just like you, but he can teach you something if you're willing to listen." Briar stared at the horse, feeling both drawn to it and terrified of it at the same time. She had never ridden a horse before, let alone one as wild as Shadow, but there was something in her, something deep inside that wanted to prove herself. "You want me to ride him?" Briar asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Not just ride him," Tom replied. "You've got to understand him. He's not a tool to be tamed. He's a partner, and you need to learn how to work with him." Briar hesitated. She didn't know if she was ready for this kind of challenge. But the thought of backing down, of running from something else in her life, was something she couldn't bear. This was her chance to prove she wasn't just some wild, reckless girl. She was more than that. Taking a deep breath, Briar stepped into the pen. Shadow watched her closely, his gaze steady and calculating. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Briar extended her hand toward the horse. She didn't know why she did it, but something about the way Shadow stood there, so still yet so full of life, made her feel like she wasn't alone in this. For the first time in a long while, Briar felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a calm that came from running away or hiding. It was a calm that came from facing something head-on without fear. Shadow took a step forward and Briar took a step back, waiting. They were both testing each other, seeing how far they could go. "Go on," Tom said from the edge of the pen. "You can do this," and so Briar began. The real challenge had only just begun. But for the first time, she felt like she was ready to face it. The days that followed Briar's first encounter with Shadow were nothing like she had expected. She thought the ranch would break her spirit, that the work would be too hard, and that she would once again run away from everything. But instead of feeling broken, Briar found something within herself that had been missing for a long time: purpose. She had never imagined that a simple horse would become the catalyst for her transformation, but in the days that followed, Shadow was more than just a challenge. He was a reflection of everything Briar had kept hidden deep inside. The first few attempts to ride him were chaotic. Briar didn't know how to handle a horse, let alone one as wild and strong as Shadow. At first, she tried to approach him with the same reckless energy she had always used in her life. She thought she could overpower him, that her spirit would simply force him into submission. But Shadow wasn't a horse that could be dominated. He fought back, bucking and rearing, throwing Briar off with an ease that left her both frustrated and amazed. Every time she hit the ground, her body ached, but she got back up again. The pain didn't matter. The bruises didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that she kept going. It was Tom who watched from the sidelines, never intervening unless absolutely necessary. He knew that Briar had to learn, just like anyone else. There were no shortcuts in life, and the ranch was the perfect place for her to understand that. "You'll learn," Tom said one morning, as Briar limped back to the barn after yet another failed attempt. "But you can't force it. You have to earn it. Shadow won't trust you if you don't trust yourself." Briar was frustrated. She didn't know how to trust herself. Her life had been a series of quick decisions, impulsive choices, and constant running. Trust was something she had never really given to anyone, especially not herself. But Tom's words stuck with her. She began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as lost as she thought. Maybe in the end, the only thing standing between her and success was the ability to slow down, to breathe, and to think before acting. Over the next few days, Briar focused less on brute strength and more on patience. Instead of charging at Shadow, she began to approach him slowly, with care. She learned his body language, the way he flicked his ears when he was annoyed, the way he shifted his weight when he was nervous. Slowly, the walls she had built around herself started to come down. She realized that Shadow wasn't just a wild animal to be conquered. He was like her, untamed and free. But he wasn't lost. He just needed someone who could meet him halfway. By the end of the week, Briar had her first successful ride. It wasn't perfect. She wasn't able to guide Shadow with the precision she had hoped for, and she fell off twice. But the important thing was that she stayed on longer each time. The feeling of the wind rushing past her as she rode Shadow across the wide-open fields was like nothing she had ever experienced. For the first time in years, Briar felt a sense of belonging, a connection to something that was both wild and real. She wasn't trying to tame it. She was becoming part of it. But Briar wasn't the only one who was changing. The ranch itself, a place that had seemed so foreign and cold when she first arrived, was starting to feel like home. The workers who had once eyed her with suspicion were beginning to show her respect. They saw her dedication, the way she got back up every time she fell, and how she was learning the skills she would need to survive on the ranch. Slowly but surely, Briar was becoming part of the team. She wasn't just the wild girl who had wandered in from nowhere. She was becoming a rider, a worker, someone who could be counted on. Tom watched all of this from a distance, pleased with the progress Briar was making. He knew she wasn't fully there yet. There was still something wild in her that needed to be honed. But he also saw the potential. She had a fire inside her that could ignite something powerful, and all she needed was the right spark. Things took a turn when the ranch was suddenly faced with a new challenge. A neighboring rancher named Donovan Westmore had been eyeing Tom's land for months. Westmore wasn't the kind of man to back down easily, and he wasn't interested in fair dealings. He wanted the land, and he was willing to do anything to get it. Westmore had a reputation for using underhanded tactics to push people out of the way, and Tom knew it was only a matter of time before he would try something with the ranch. One afternoon, Briar was in the stables grooming Shadow, when Tom approached her with a serious look on his face. "There's trouble coming," he said quietly. "Westmore's been making moves on the land. I don't know what his plans are, but we need to be ready." Briar's heart skipped a beat. The ranch was the only place she had ever felt a sense of belonging. She wasn't ready to lose it, not without a fight. But she didn't know the first thing about defending land. Her skills had always been about running or escaping. She had never been one to stand and face a challenge head-on. But this was different. "This was home, what can I do?" she asked, surprising herself. She didn't wait for Tom to tell her to leave or stay out of it. This time she wanted to be part of the solution. She was ready to prove that the wildness in her wasn't just chaos. It could be power, strength, and determination. Tom looked at her for a long moment before nodding. "You'll need to be smart about this. We won't fight them head-on, but we'll use the land to our advantage. If you're with me, I'll need you to help us outsmart them." Over the next few days, Briar helped Tom and the other ranch hands set up a series of traps and defenses around the ranch. They didn't have much in terms of weaponry or resources, but they knew the land better than anyone. Briar used her knowledge of the surrounding hills and valleys to create ambush points and safe routes for retreat if things got too heated. She wasn't just relying on strength. She was using her wits, something she had never really done before. As the plan took shape, Briar began to feel a sense of pride she hadn't known was possible. The night before Westmore's men were expected to make their move, Briar stood outside, looking up at the stars. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She wasn't afraid. She had come a long way from the reckless girl who had wandered onto the ranch. She had learned the value of patience, the power of trust, and the strength of her own spirit. Shadow, the wild horse she had once thought would be her downfall, was now her partner, and together they were ready for whatever came next. The next morning, the storm hit. Westmore's men arrived, but they weren't prepared for what Tom and Briar had planned. What followed was a battle of wits and courage as Briar led a daring counterattack. The ranch hands used the terrain to their advantage, setting traps that caught Westmore's men off guard. Briar, riding Shadow, was at the heart of it all, her quick thinking and wild instincts guiding them through the chaos. She wasn't just running away anymore. She was fighting for what was hers, standing tall and strong alongside those who had once doubted her. By the time the dust settled, Westmore's men had been forced to retreat, and the ranch was safe. Briar stood victorious, her wild spirit no longer something to be feared but something to be respected. She had found her place, not just as a rider but as a fighter, someone who was willing to face the storm head-on. Tom smiled as he watched Briar ride back to the ranch house, her eyes filled with determination and pride. She had become more than he had ever hoped for. Briar Fox, the girl who had been too wild for anyone to handle, had finally found where she belonged. Not by running from the world, but by riding through it, free and unbreakable.